Welcome to Grace with Conviction. My name is Peter Hartzell. Very pleased to be with you today. My best friend, my wife, Amanda.
Hello.
Hello. And today we are going to be picking up. I would encourage you to go back and watch last week's episode, because last week we kind of took a deep dive into our testimony, our story of growing up in the charismatic world, growing up in a cult, growing up with a lot of influences, specifically in the charismatic world. International House of Prayer, Burn 24/7, the Vineyard Movement, Toronto,
Bethel,
the Assemblies of God. I mean, just a lot of different influences, church influences that really shaped our upbringing, and also then our journey into kind of stepping out of that, finding our identity, forming ministries. We formed a ministry that was very heavily influenced by Bethel, doing miracles, signs and wonders, power evangelism, inner healing, all of that. And so kind of where we left off was really talking about how that affected our faith, our belief in God, our doctrines, and really what we thought about God, how our relationship with God affected our day-to-day life and affected our ministry, affected the direction of our life. And I think the most damaging part of all of that was that we really believed that God blessed us when we were pleasing to Him, when we were doing good things, we were, living a powerful, dynamic life and all that. But for some reason, I think you kind of touched on this, like you always felt like God's not really pleased with me because I don't get these same experiences. Like when I'm in these times, I don't have the same powerful supernatural experiences of like falling out or holy laughter or whatever. And then fast forward, it actually started to shape, like talking about like you're when your mom got sick.
Right.
It's my fault that she's not getting healed because I don't have enough faith. My faith isn't strong enough to heal my mom of cancer. My faith isn't strong enough to stop my body from miscarrying this baby. And when we miscarried, and the pain that you felt and the shame of like, you're not good, you need to command that baby to stay in your body. And if that baby dies, it's your fault.
Right. There's just, it was just a lot of pressure of, when my mom did die, I should have commanded her to wake up, and I carried that for a very long time. And, and so, as we left off, like we said, there was this tension that was beginning to happen, and it was only a matter of time before something was going to break. And so, we mentioned that the ministry we'd helped start completely fell apart. Our time with the burn had definitely run its course, and we had to part ways. And in the midst of that, as much as I question a lot of the experiences and things that we witnessed, and, having a miscarriage thrust us into a world of infertility, unbeknownst to us, and being told, you'll never have children. When I finally got scanned, and they were questioning whether I had ovaries because they couldn't find them, and because I had such severe endometriosis that so many women deal with, that they were coated in this tissue. And the fertility specialist we met with was like, I want to give you a hysterectomy. Mind you, I'm 25 at this stage in my life. And we knew I had had several dreams about children that were my own. And we just really, really believed that the Lord was going to heal me, and that we were going to have children of our own. We had been given prophetic words from people, pictures that they had seen of me holding a daughter out in front of our yard by a big tree, just lots of things like that. And
some really specific, like dreams, specific pictures,
hair colors, textures, curls, straight, everything. And so in the midst of the turmoil of that season of life, I can say I was hanging on by a thread, that my belief in God was not being determined necessarily by the external voices.
Right.
It was heavily playing part, though, in how I viewed him. And so I have a surgery scheduled, and we...
no hysterectomy.
No hysterectomy. We told him, we said, do as much as you can. You're not allowed to take an ovary. You're not allowed to take my reproductive system. Do what you can, but we want you to leave me intact, please. We believe we are going to have children. And so he respected our wishes. What was supposed to be a 2-hour surgery ended up into being a 6-hour surgery. And when I came out of it, groggy, not feeling so great, and he proceeded to explain that he did the best he could. He was on the forefront of robotic surgery for infertility. And so that's what they had done. And he said it was like, the way he described it was chipping away at concrete. And he said, we did as much as we could. I did have to take a part of your right ovary, but I left everything. I regret to inform you, you will never have children. There is no hope for you. He wanted to put me on hormone suppressants, and we just really were like, no, we felt like we should do the surgery, and that's about it. And I got pregnant a few months after the surgery, and I promptly miscarried again. And I remember the doctor telling me, this is going to be your pattern. And I'm nervous for you that at one of these points is going to be an ectopic pregnancy, and
it could kill you.
Mm-hmm. And so we were just like, well, I hear what you're saying, but I raise you I just don't think that's how this is going to go. Yeah. And it wasn't this
right. I was going to say that.
It was not this ignorant, hopeful, not based in any sort of reality, right, denying medicine, denying any of that. No. There was just this thing inside of us.
Yeah.
We just knew.
Yeah.
And so come late August, a few months later, I take a pregnancy test and it's positive. And by this point, there was no cute setting it up to tell him. It was just like, I took a pregnancy test, it's positive. That was to the point we had gotten to. And so because I was considered high risk, I was in at like 6 weeks or maybe 8 weeks, I forget. And Dr. Harvey, for the first time since surgery, gave me an ultrasound. And
he didn't believe it at first.
He didn't. I mean, yeah. I think he was like, sure, I bet you're pregnant, but
ectopic.
I look forward to hearing from you in another week or two, when you miscarry again. And so we went in very excited, and
hopeful,
very hopeful.
Yeah.
And he did the ultrasound, and he immediately finds the baby, and he goes, there's its heart. And he starts to kind of look around, and he goes, Amanda, I know what your womb looks like. It's ingrained now in my brain.
He didn't even say, I think he said he used
he went on to tell us this. So he's like, I know exactly what it looked like.
Yeah. When
we were sewing you up, when we called it, when we said, we have done what we can, we just need to be done. We need to sew her up and we're done. He said, I know what it looks like. And he said, there is not a single sign of endometrial tissue anywhere. I don't know how to reconcile this. Your womb looks like a normal, healthy woman's womb that has never been riddled with endometriosis like yours was. And we smiled and said, we told you so.
Right, of course. We knew it all along.
We told you that God was going to heal me and we were going to have a baby. And I think he was still skeptical.
Yeah.
I think he was still like baffled. It was denying all of the science and the doctorate experience and all of the wisdom and knowledge he had gleaned in school. It was confounding all of that. And because the wisdom of man is foolishness to God. And I greatly appreciate the medical world, but they're just that. They're not God. And so we skipped out of there praising God. I wish I could say I had this deep, like, all right, but I was riddled with a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. What if I lose this baby again? What if I miscarriage? And so I would set these little markers in my brain and on my calendar. If I could just get to this point, okay, if we could just get to this point, then if something happened and the baby had to be delivered, there's a high probability it could survive. If I could just get, and all of these markers along the way.
So there was like a gratitude to the Lord for fulfilling a promise to us, but also this fear that he wasn't really.
It was still on my shoulders to make this happen.
Keep the baby in your belly.
I still just needed to proclaim life in my womb, and that it was, a lot of pressure on myself to perform for God, to prove I've got what it takes. And I'm happy to report that we gave birth to our son, who had red hair, just like my dreams of this little baby. I knew it was a boy. And that was just such a blessing and just such a testimony to the Lord's miraculous working. And so our doctor was kind of like, okay, you had your kid. I hope you had your fun. You're not going to have any more kids. That's just like, I don't know how this one squeaked by. You got lucky. I mean, that's what he said. You got lucky with this one. So congratulations. See you later. And what was it? Six months later?
Yeah, about 6 months later.
I got pregnant again, which I wish I could say I was rejoicing, but it was not in my timeline.
Right.
And
you were not ready for baby number 2.
We did not feel, we had come to grips in our hearts with like, if this is all the Lord gives us is our one son, we'll be so okay with that.
But we do have that picture.
But I still had dreams and prophetic
curly
words,
blonde hair little girl,
of this little girl looking at a screen, and from her back she's got this matted kind of curlyish blonde hair, so I still had these little fragments of things, but I kind of at that point maybe it was just wishful thinking, bad pizza, as they like to say. And lo and behold, I get pregnant again. Call my doctor. I'm pregnant again. By this time when we're coming in, he goes, I give up. I don't know. He's like, I want you to know, yours is the story now I share with women who come in your situation. Yours is the hope I give them. And because he went on to teach in the Northwest other doctors about this procedure, and he had asked for our permission, but he said, your surgery, your scans, your story is what I'm using as I'm teaching these other doctors about this robotic surgery. And so I wish I could say we had shared the gospel with him, but at that point, we still really didn't understand the gospel. For us, it was like coming through the power evangelism world. It was like kind of like a ha-ha in your face, kind of arrogant attitude towards those who might question whether God can perform
Oh, you
miracles or not.
small-minded person.
Yeah.
You don't know the power of my God.
Yeah, and so we had our little girl. After we had her, about 5 months after we had her, we moved. We left Montana and moved to Tennessee. And she was probably about 1. And we had a back door with a screen on it. And she now has straight hair. When she was little, just on her backside, she'd get these little curly curls. They were just white blonde, beautiful. And one day I was in the kitchen. She was toddling around. And I was doing dishes and I glanced over because she was looking at our dog in the backyard. And I looked over at her. And it's like those moments you have where it's like you're hit with this remembrance. And that dream I had, that image of this little blonde-haired girl with curls in the back of her head looking out this screen in a back door, that was her.
There it is.
And I knew that was her. Now, I had another dream of being in a house that I didn't recognize. This was when we were still in Montana, and being pregnant and going to this front door to open to let people into our house, and I was pregnant. But at this point, we were kind of thinking, we got our boy, we got our girl. I think we'll be good.
We're good.
Anyways, so we still have stuff like this happening in our life.
So we're there is supernatural things like dreams and fulfillments of dreams. And like, it seems like these promises from God that are like deep seated, like these like firm found. It's not based in like this wishful thinking. It's almost, it's like outside of us. It's like these promises that we were holding on to, but not because we had any good reason to. It was like we just had this deep knowing that this is what is ahead for us. And we had no idea how it was going to play out. But so then we're in the middle of this charismatic world, and we're not seeing your mom healed of cancer. Right. We're not seeing our pastors. We're seeing our ministries not bear good fruit. We're seeing, things that are there's like this cognitive dissonance almost, where God is supernatural, and we're seeing these prophetic supernatural things happening in our life in one sense, but then not in another, and we're trying to reckon with it.
Right, and it can't. So, I'm pregnant with our son, our first, as we're now no longer a part of anything. At this point, we're kind of sitting ducks. We're just kind of stagnant. We don't really know what to do. And so we were approached by, it actually was your old youth pastor, right. Who had started a church years prior, and they were in need of a worship leader. They found out we were no longer doing anything. And so they put the offer out, hey, would you come join staff and come be our worship leaders for our church? And, we had our hesitancies, based on some past experiences, but just in hearing his heart, we felt like, I think he's on the right track. I think we could partner together, and I think do something pretty awesome.
And he knew Sean Foyt, and we had hosted the Burn at their church several times, and we were still very much in that way of thinking like, well, maybe doing prayer and worship and being a part of another church that has more opportunities for us to kind of figure this thing out. Yeah. Maybe in a more healthy,
not so hyper charismatic, right. Not so.
It was Assemblies of God, so there was still that.
Yeah, there was still a belief in,
right.
That God was supernatural, allowing room for the Spirit to move, but we did not realize that the church was struggling, really hard, and that the pastor had connections to another church out of California that was on the forefront of the church growth movement, the seeker-friendly movement.
John Maxwell, Andy Stanley, that kind of.
And so in order for the church to support the church we were part of in Missoula, we kind of had to do things their way. He said, for this church in California, they were looking at our Missoula church saying, in order for us to support you, in order to grow and to make good money, you have to follow our practices. And so now we have kind of drifted out of the hyper-charismatic movement, and unbeknownst to us, we're now being thrust into the seeker-friendly movement. We had to read Andy Stanley's Deep and Wide book. And I remember we'd go through it as a church staff, and I would just be like, something about this smells really bad and rotten. But again, I was so biblically illiterate.
Right.
I couldn't tell you what was wrong other than it just didn't seem right. That now we're playing secular music over the loudspeakers as people are coming in. We're chalking up a win for the church of someone coming in from the world and identifying Britney Spears being played over the speakers as like a win for God. We were asked as worship leaders and expected to lead secular worship songs.
Yeah, it's not worship. Secular.
Right. So, excuse
secular
me.
songs.
Secular songs
in
for worship.
We were doing a series called Toxic. I think there was an expectation to lead the Radioactive by Imagine Dragons, and even talking about doing Toxic by Britney Spears.
Well, we had laughed when because we were, again, finding ourselves in a position of being immersed in this, but yet kind of we have not bought into this.
Right.
We think this kind of smells like poo-poo. And the pastor is being essentially given what to speak on. Here's your topics. Here's your points. You can kind of fill in a little bit, but we're going to give you what you need to say. And so because the sermon series was called Toxic, we kind of quipped laughingly like, why don't we just lead Toxic by Britney Spears? And they all went,
hey.
That's brilliant.
That's brilliant, yeah.
We were just kidding.
Right.
We're not actually going to lead that song. And so we really began to feel like we are just being dead weights. They are saying jump, and they want other leaders to say how high. And we're over here going, why? And I think the breaking point for us.
I got sick.
You got sick, but it was right before that. The leader from the California church had come.
Oh, right.
And
yeah.
We had a staff meeting at the pastor's house, and the leader had flown in from California. He had given marching orders. And apparently, as a staff,
we failed.
We
only had like a fraction of the percentage of new visitors at the church than was expected, and that was not meeting their metrics, and that was not okay, and we weren't pulling our weight. And if this church is going to serve, they're saying we're funneling all of our money to you. Now you need to pull your weight to make it worth our time, so that because that was the thing, is that that's how they grew, was they would duplicate themselves and they would grow struggling churches, and then I guess the expectation was at some point the financial thing would turn into this machine that would start to generate revenue again, and then the church would become self-sufficient, and then that was the idea. But it was like all these new expectations were put on the staff and the people and it wasn't very clearly articulated, because the church was struggling to stay open and
willing to do whatever it might take.
Right.
And so I remember at that meeting, at this point I had Emery. I was a few months postpartum, and we're sitting there as a staff getting screamed at. I'm not just talking like a hard, like, come on, you guys, we got a motivational. No. This was a all out assault, screaming at us. And I remember sitting there panicking, like that fight or flight started to kick in, a lot of hormones surging through my body at the same time. And I began to go, I need to get out of here. I need to be able to remove myself. And so I kind of was like, I need to go deal with Emery, our son, and quickly excused myself up the stairs to the upstairs bathroom, sat down, and just started sobbing. Because my whole world still was trying to prove my worth. And so to be sitting there, being told, you're invaluable. You have no worth.
Unvaluable.
Yeah, you're unvaluable.
Yeah.
It was really cutting to the core, while also I'm like, but this is so gross. This is so gross. And so that really, for us, we walked away from that meeting like,
I remember the drive.
We can't do this anymore.
I remember the drive home from that meeting, and just like, it was pretty quiet in the car, and you and I were just like, what do we do with this?
Right.
And then I got really sick, and like I had this, it kind of came out of the blue. Looking back on it, I mean, I think with all the stress that we were under, I'm
Yeah.
not surprised that I got sick. Of course, everything in me was like, I want to get out of this too, because, but I don't know how to do that.
hmm
I don't want to leave these guys high and dry. If we leave, there's nobody else that could really step in, really, which ultimately, when we did leave,
Well, there had been another guy who had claimed he wanted to help us with worship. It later was disclosed that he was actually gunning for our position.
Yeah.
And so when Peter started to get sick, he was like, "Hey, can you just take over right now?" And week after week, he's not getting better. He's completely lost his voice, literally.
Yeah, I couldn't even speak.
No
It was like
voice.
over about like a month.
Mm-hmm.
I had literally had no voice. I mean, barely a whisper.
Yeah.
And I called the pastor. I mean, he was my youth pastor from
Right.
from the church I grew up in, and I knew, and I grew up with his kids. I'm still, friends with his son, and so
Yeah.
I felt this, like, I don't want to let you guys down, but also, like, I remember we sat down with him and I said, I've lost my voice, not just physically, but like I've lost my voice.
Mhm.
And it wasn't just I've lost my voice in this church and I mean, I had, but like, I don't have anything else to say. I
Right.
don't know what else to say. I don't know what to do.
We said, we recognize you're looking for leaders that when you say jump, they say how high, and we're not that way, and we can't be that way, and we cannot support the way this church is moving and the direction in which it's going. It's unfortunately, we have to turn in our resignation. And, and so
That was super painful, because I felt like I failed. I felt like I had failed on a commitment, or I had let down an expectation that was put on me. And also I had a high expectation too. I thought maybe, like, if we're involved here, we could help turn this thing around, and
Right.
like we could help to infuse some fresh life into this church, and maybe some really something new can happen here. And ultimately, the church, not too long after that, ended up closing its doors, and I feel bad that it didn't work out the way we wanted it to work out. But at the same time, I don't think there was anything that could have been done to avoid that from happening. We couldn't save it.
Right. I think the writing was on the wall.
Before we even came in the first.
Yeah, before we even came in. And and so at this point we're pretty jaded, I would say. I think we were pretty just like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to think anymore. I don't know. I can look back now and realize after my first child, I was dealing with postpartum depression. But at that time in the mid 2000s, and especially in the church world, you didn't talk about depression. You didn't talk about those kind of struggles, especially with a charismatic background. That was weakness. And so I really stifled that. And so I can look back now and see a tornado forming, and then I get pregnant with our second. And our life at this point is praising God out of one side of our mouth. And I know we mentioned this in our first episode, praising God out of one side of our mouth and living like heathens most every other day of the week. And just a lot of bad drunkenness and partying and just trying to honestly fill that massive void deep inside of us. And, I took a lot to shopping to try to fill that. And so we have our second, and at this point now I'm beginning to feel or see some of the rocks on the bottom. And I think you were there too, trying to keep it together, really trying to hold it together. And
I started drinking a lot heavier,
just really self-medicating what is going on. And we lost some really we lost a lot of our friendships in that season. The like kind of friends you refer to, like David and Jonathan type friends.
Kinds of people you think you're going to be friends with for the rest of your life, that have your back and you have theirs, and you're thick as thieves.
And so that all came crashing down. We were beginning to think, we think our time in Montana has run its course. I think we need to go somewhere else. We've outgrown this state that he had grown up in his whole life. I pretty much grew up in, and we needed something different. And I had eyes, our second, and I remember one day walking around this house that we had bought, gutted, dumped way too much money in to make this like dream home of ours that we're going to die in, walking around. And I remember that I was getting laundry out, and you were kind of like in your office, and you leaned over and you said, "You okay?" And I was like, I just didn't answer.
Well, I heard you go,
Yeah. And
you were in the laundry room. My office was over here. And I remember sitting at my computer, and it was like, all of a sudden I felt this dark presence. It was more than just a dark cloud. Like, I felt this dark, I'll call it demonic, because I know that's what it was.
Absolutely.
There was this dark demonic presence that I felt, and it was like I literally felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And I knew that my wife was not okay.
Yeah.
I knew there was some, and it wasn't like anything had really happened that day up to that point, you know?
It was compounding. It was what was going on inside. It was all of the lies, all of the deception, all of the self-medicating, all of that. I had tried to speak all the good words over myself and convince myself, and all of the positive affirmations I could do, and none of it was working. And I was carrying a laundry basket, and I walked into our closet. He was hot on my heels, and I experienced my first panic attack. And if you've ever had a panic attack, it's scary. I thought I was going to die. I could not breathe any longer. My breaths were getting shallow. The room around me was closing in, and I cried out, "Call an ambulance. I think I'm dying." And the ambulance came, and by that point, by the time they got there, he had managed to help me kind of breathe through it. And you had dealt with minor panic attacks in your life growing up. Anxiety riddled your life.
I knew it right away when I saw it. I said, "I told you."
Yep, I remember you just saying,
"Panic attack.
Keep with me.
It's going to be okay. I'm here. You're going to be okay."
Yeah, keep looking at me, just trying to help me get through this. And the ambulance comes, they run tests, and they said, "You should probably go to the emergency room. Do you want to take the ambulance? Do you want to just drive yourself?" He's like, "I don't want to take the ambulance. We'll just drive and we'll go there." And I had just had a postpartum checkup like a few days before. And I remember my doctor asking like, "So, you doing okay?" And again, it was weakness to say, "No, I'm not." To say, "No, I actively think about killing myself multiple times a day. I know how I do it. I've mapped it out." Like, you don't say that. It feels so shameful. And I think that's such a tactic of the enemy, is to fill you with such shame, to make you feel this like ownership over this thing that's not yours. It's demonic. It's not good. And there can be chemical my hormones were playing a big part. I really firmly believe depression is a mix of chemical and spiritual. And so we went to the emergency room, and, of course they didn't have much to say. "You're fine."
They did offer you morphine.
Yeah, I think they offered me a hard drug, and I was like, "No, I'm good."
Right.
I'm good. But it was just like, but we drove home, and you looked at me and you said, "It's time to go, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, I think it's time to go." And at this point, we had already felt this tug towards Nashville. He'd spent a little time there before we got married. And we just felt like, of all the places we had looked at, it felt like it made sense for us to stay on the West Coast. That's where family was, and our few remaining friends were. And but we just felt like, nah. And so we took a trip just to go see. And we landed, and we're just like, Yep.
Nashville's home.
This is where we're supposed to be. I cried the day we had to go back to Montana. We put our house on the market in a side of town that was undesirable. It was kind of up and coming, but not really. A home that was pretty high priced in the middle of winter in Montana. No one wants to move to Montana in the middle of winter. No one wants to live in Montana in the middle of winter.
Nobody
Let's
wants
face
to
it.
live in that part of town in the middle of winter.
In Montana. and so
it was like the day we got it on the
day we landed in Tennessee, we got a call from it was the day we got back home from our trip to Tennessee that our realtor called us and said, "Why aren't you calling me back?" Like, what are you talking about? Because it went on the market the day we landed in Nashville, and we were there for about 5 days. And we said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "You have an offer on your home." What?
Right.
What? Okay. And so, boom. I mean, it just was like everything fell in place. We packed our house up, and within a couple weeks,
we found a house in Nashville.
We were able to find a house sight unseen in Nashville, and packed up our life, our 1.5-year-old, our 5-month-old, our dog at the time, and drove ourselves across the country with a storm hot on our heels. Whew, it's a wild story, but hot on our heels to make it where we hadn't slept for over 30 hours because we were trying to beat the storm because everything was going to shut down. And if we didn't make it to get to the title to close, we would be homeless until Nashville reopened because of this massive ice storm. And if anybody knows anything about the South, when the snow hits, everything shuts down.
Milk and bread are gone.
And so we arrive, literally pull in and turn the car off as the ice starts to fall. And we blew up beds. We broke open pack and plays for the kids and just collapsed. And for the first time felt like we could rest. We were home and we could take a breath, and woke up that evening driving around thinking, how bad could this be? Come on. This is not that
Walmart,
bad.
And there was like nobody in Walmart.
And all the bread and milk was gone.
All the bread and milk was gone.
And I looked at Peter and I was like, where did we move?
Right.
Because in Montana, it's like, whatever, you just deal with it. But the ice, South ice and northern snow are very, very different. We soon would come to find out over the years. But that was really our beginning. I think we had to be pulled out of this familiar place into the unfamiliar and enter a season of borderline isolation because we really didn't know anybody.
Right.
When we moved there. You had family, but kind of distant family.
They were so great to us. I mean, they welcomed us.
So sweet. I love them so much. But we were very much now on our own for the first time since having children, since being married and having kids. We were about to establish our family. And as wonderful as it was, within the first year, just because you pack your life away in boxes, we kind of just packed all of our stuff away, our emotional and spiritual stuff away too. Well, we'll deal with it later. And it was on about 6 months later, it was the eve of our middle's first birthday.
Yep.
When I lost it. I completely lost it. I had reached such a despairing place. Here we were in a new town. I knew absolutely no one, in a very different culture than the North that I had really been used to. I understood some of the nuances of Southern culture because of my mom. But I had no one. We had no one. We didn't have a church at this point.
We had so many friends, but no real community.
Yeah, yet. We didn't really have neighbors. And so we were alone. And I firmly believe that what the enemy intended for evil, God redeemed that for his good, for his glory, for my good, for his glory. But I crumbled the weight I had been carrying around for most all of my life came to a head. He called the police on me. He was that scared. And I, at that point, was so not myself.
No.
I remember when they walked in, just being so angry at you, angry at them. Get out of my life. Get away from me. You know, our marriage was on the line. I remember you telling me, you can leave, but you're not allowed to take the children. So here's the keys and go. But the kids stay with me. And I remember just being so like, I don't know where to go.
Right.
I got nowhere to go.
Right.
So fine, you go sleep upstairs. I'm not sleeping with you. My dad is calling me because you had called my dad. I mean, at this point, my poor husband is like, I don't know what to do. Like, and so we slept in separate rooms, woke up the next morning, and I remember everything in me was like, I just need to confess that I'm not okay. But it was like this, almost like this tying of my tongue, this like block in my throat. And if you're listening and this is, I get it. I've been there. I'm still there. I really believe it's the enemy, because he knows the power of isolation. He understands the power of confession. And if he can keep us full of shame and locked in so we don't confess our sins to one another, he can keep us in isolation. It's when we can confess our sins to one another that it brings to light what's in the dark. And so with all of my might, I mean, that's literally how it felt. I went, I think something's wrong with me. Like that's how I just had to like push it out of myself,
I think I just laughed.
Yeah,
like,
he went, you think?
No kidding. You don't say.
And
there was no shame there. It's not like you're telling me anything I don't know. Like, really?
You don't say. And I wish I could say at that moment, it was just like, everything's so better. And it wasn't. I still didn't feel good. We still had a really crappy night celebrating our daughter's first birthday.
Went to the Cheesecake Factory. I was wearing a very similar shirt, and we were
sat outside
and taking selfies to commemorate this moment. And
everything's so great. We're so wonderful.
Yeah.
And I wasn't. And, but the next day, my dad called and he said, honey, I was praying for you all night. And he, really felt that the Lord had brought to mind some of my family history on my mom's side that has a lot of mental illness that happened. So whether there's a genetic or chemical predisposition to that, but he just really tried to encourage me to just get help, to surrender to Christ. And, and I sought, so I started to call, I need to get to therapy. I need to see a psychologist. That was my thought. I need to see a psychologist. I can't get over this myself. I need to go talk to someone. And so I started pounding the door of different psychologists. Here's my issue. Would you take me? Let me talk to the doctor. He doesn't think there's anything wrong, so no. I mean, that was the answer I was getting from these psychologists. We don't think there's anything that bad, so no, we don't want to help you, or no, we don't take your insurance, or no, we don't. And I was just like, I'm doomed. At this point, I'm looking for someone else outside to tell me how to fix myself.
Well, and at that point, we hadn't really found a church yet, had we?
No.
I mean, we were still, we had started to look around for churches, but we really hadn't. And I think we had checked in.
Apprehensive too.
Yeah, we were really, we were still not sure if we were going to ever go back to church. And we were watching sermons online.
Yeah.
We were still watching like sermons from Bethel and other you know,
Streaming the prayer
streaming the
room.
IHOP prayer room and, you know, and like writing music ourselves. But we were alone.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so I finally found this one psychiatrist, not just a psychologist, a psychiatrist who said, yeah, I'll see you. You can come on down. So I went to him. He operated out of this little house. He was this old dude, kind of quirky. I think you kind of have to be a little weird in that world. And he sat me down and he said, I want you to know I've been doing this for 50 years or something like that. And he said, I guarantee there's nothing you're going to say that's going to scare me. I've been scared by some of my patients. I doubt that you're going to say anything that scares me. In other words, just be transparent. Don't sugarcoat it. You know, and he has me color a sheet and I color it the way I always would. And he looks at it and goes, yeah, there's some anxiety. I can see some anxiety in the way you're scribbling in different directions and, you know, and asks me questions, holds up the, you know, the different pictures. What do you see? And then he gave me this test. Just this questionnaire. I don't really totally remember it, but it was timed. And he said, you're probably not going to get through it, but just complete it to your best ability.
And you finished it, didn't you?
I finished it
with
like a minute remaining. Blew his mind. Might not have freaked you out, but it blew your mind. And he was. I mean, he was like, no one's ever finished this. And so he concluded, there's nothing wrong with you.
You're a genius.
He said, I think you're really smart.
Yeah.
I think you're in a new place. I think you're a young mom. You're bored. He encouraged me to find a live-in nanny and to give my mind to something. And he said, you're fine. And kicked me out and shut the door behind me. I don't ever want to see you again, essentially. And I remember getting in the car and feeling,
now what?
I don't feel like there's nothing wrong with me. I don't feel okay. That was super unhelpful. Like I was looking for him to solve my problems. I wanted him to give me the answers for the things that woed my soul. I wanted him to apply the balm that only God can apply. I think that psychologists can be helpful, but they have their place, and they're not a replacement for the truth that can only be found in Christ, in his word. And so I drove trying to cry. I wanted to cry and I couldn't cry. And I went home and I went into a room and I just shut the door behind me. And I just fell to my knees. And I said, Lord, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know. I'm so lost. I'm so hurt. And I'm so empty. I give up. And in that moment, I felt like I really heard, you have been looking for yourself in all the wrong places. You have been looking for your identity in everything but me. You're trying to find your worth in all of these worldly constructs, but not me. Seek me first. Surrender to me. Allow me to heal you. Allow me to be Lord of your life. And so in that moment, I just said, all right, Lord, I give it all to you. I didn't understand what that really meant.
It's like you already thought you were surrendered to the Lord, but it's like, okay, I surrender, whatever that means.
Right.
So now tell me what that means. What does it mean to surrender to you? But I don't have anything. I don't have any other options.
Right. And you would think in our background, you would think through all of our experiences, how could you ever get to this kind of despairing place? And I think that's one of the biggest issues with the very a lot of these movements that I don't know if they ever set out to lead people away from the truth or if it just happened. But I never knew the truth.
Right.
And what I was told was the truth. I now recognize that wasn't the truth. And I thought I was good enough. I thought that I needed to be good enough. And I always struggled with not ever feeling good enough. And I was told that it was all on my shoulders. And that
Not salvation. You're saved, you're good, but this like purpose and meaning and value and worth is in what you produce.
yeah.
And because we're supposed to do good works, right? So like go do good works. And so like the more good works you do, it's almost like you're earning brownie points, you're earning rewards, eternal rewards in heaven. It's like, look, God, look at all these great things I'm doing for you. But it's impossible for us to separate that from our identity.
Right. Because I kept looking at, I want to be like this person. I want to be like this person. I want to have a platform like this person. If only I could be like this person. And so I would imitate these fallen men and women when we're told to imitate Christ, to be like God, to look for him as our example in how to conduct ourselves. And that is the polar opposite of what I was doing. And I really feel almost like when you're in that world, kind of how you're conditioned to behave is to platform these men and women and to fix all of your hope, all of your being, everything you have into them. And when you do that, either they'll fail at some point because we're sinful, and then you're left with a rubbish that now you've got to sort through and figure out, or you fail in yourself. You come to the end of yourself. And that is the place that the Lord brought me, was beginning to bring you to the complete end of myself. But I wouldn't see the full picture until 3-4 years later.
Yeah. And then, so I guess I get to go back a little bit, backtrack a little bit to kind of that time in Montana before we left and went to Tennessee. And I remember that after we stepped down from the church and we were like, all right, no more. Okay, Milo, here we go.
He's coming.
Time for.
He's cooled down.
All right. I was looking for significance in my gift and my skill. And I think that I presumed that because I had gifting and skill, that was where my worth and my value was. And so I always needed to put myself in a place where that gifting and that skill would be utilized to its fullest. And that's where I would find my purpose. I didn't feel like I had a lot of purpose, but I felt like I would find it by attaching myself to other things, which is why I felt this draw towards to Sean Foyt and Burn 24/7, because we had this commonality growing up and going to the same school. We knew a lot of the same people. We were in kind of the same stream. And I thought, well, if I can attach myself to his ministry, backing up to when I was at IHOP, and, this is years later, and I'm watching Corey Asbury's career get crazy, and, his music is going all over the world now. And I really struggled with, before that, before Corey's name was out there, how many times would I come to you and be like, when's it going to be my turn? Not just with IHOP stuff and with Corey and all that, but just like in general, like, when's it going to be my turn? I'm watching all these people around me have these significant ministries and have significance, but I always felt like I was on the fringes of fame and success, and then in Nashville, we can talk about that too. Well, actually, I'll wait to get into Nashville, but it's very much that way in Nashville. Nashville is all about who you know and being in the right rooms and meeting and knowing the right people and name dropping and all that. And so, as I'm watching Corey's career go crazy, and I'm like, hon, like, what does he have that I don't have? Like, when's it going to be my turn? What the heck? And so, in Montana, I'm looking for, there's no place for me here. Like, there's no church that I'm going to be able to really step in and really utilize my gifting. And so 2 things were happening. One, I knew it was time to go because we had outgrown Missoula, but also I knew that, like, there's really nothing for me here. Like, I need a bigger pond. I need a bigger pond. And I knew Nashville. I fell in love with Nashville when I was there. And I knew that there was going to be plenty of opportunity for me there. And so we moved, and I immediately hit the ground running, like, all right, let's go figure this out. Like, where am I gonna, who am I gonna connect with next? It's gonna take my career, and I'm gonna finally find worth and value and significance. And but then we were still incubated, we were still insulated, and then I'm watching you go through depression and all that. And I went into fix it mode. Like, let me solve the problems. Let's, whatever you need, whatever you want, let's figure out how to, like, give you all the things to hopefully get you to a point where you're okay. So now I can breathe and I can figure myself out. And because as long as you're happy and you're satiated and you're good, then I can go take care of my needs. And it was really dysfunctional. It's really unhealthy. Like, I'm trying to fill your needs. I'm trying to fulfill myself. And
we're both incredibly selfish at this point too.
Completely self-serving,
self-seeking, self-centered. It was all kind of about what each of us wanted.
Right.
And that is just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Right. And I think at that point when you finally were like, I'm not okay. And I was like, okay, thank you. Thank you for finally being able to say that. I think there was a breath that we were able to take. Okay. Well, then now what? All right. Well, then let's get okay.
Right. We need to find a church. We need to find community. We can't be alone anymore.
Steve Fry was the pastor of this church, and Steve had a background that was very similar to the church I grew up in. A lot of vineyard influence, but definitely not nearly as hyper charismatic at all. No. There was a liturgical element that we really were drawn to because there was a high value for the word of God. And so this, like, word and spirit balance, that became kind of our thing, was looking for this word and spirit balance, because we were hungry for biblical truth. But we wanted it, but it needed to be reconciled inside of this, because a lot of the pastors that were preaching biblically were poo-pooing on the supernatural and the charismatic stuff. And so we weren't ready for that yet. And so we got connected to that church, and I think found, like, okay, this is a good place.
Right. It felt like a soft landing. Right.
And then Ryan Hall, who was part of the prayer and worship world, the Pasadena House of Prayer. He's the guy that wrote that song, Worthy of It All. He was there, and Ryan and I became fast friends. And Steve Garrett had started the Franklin Prayer House, which wasn't really directly tied to IHOP, but obviously had some, some handshakes there. And Ryan was, like, very much IHOP, and Steve was ready to pass the baton. So Ryan took Franklin Prayer House, and then Amanda and I were leading worship for sets for the Franklin Prayer House.
We were, like, really fully on board.
Oh, fully.
Almost like this was going to replace our church going. Like, we were going to be kind of more dedicated to the prayer room,
building the prayer room.
And that quickly became tarnished in a really good way, because of some challenges that my dad and stepmom down here were beginning to recognize deep, deep error
Right.
in the power evangelism, deliverance ministry, charismatic movement. And we would come down regularly about twice a year to spend time at the beach, spend time with them. And so we would always have dinners when we were down here, and they would begin to unpack what they were thinking, what they felt like God was showing them, some resource. So then they began to, hey, when you go back home, there's a new documentary called
Wide as the Gate?
No, called, well, yes,
That was it.
It was Wide as the Gate. They said, we've got this series for you. We think you should watch it.
Yeah.
Could be interesting. It's called Wide as the Gate. We'll loan you the DVD set and you can watch it. And we were still in Florida at the time. And then also, when you get home or whatever, there's also a documentary called American Gospel, Christ Alone. Maybe you should give that a watch too. Just, it could just be helpful for you guys.
I think that they shared that with us because they were kind of discovering, I would say they were probably like 6 months ahead of us.
So at that point, they had already identified some major errors in a lot of these movements.
Yep.
And I remember talking to my stepmom later, and that she was like, I was slightly scared to bring this up to you guys because I didn't want to risk a loss of relationship because we'd worked really hard to have a really healthy relationship, and it took work. But she said, I didn't want to risk that, but I wasn't going to sacrifice the truth for the relationship. And she has gone on to be with the Lord now in glory. But I so appreciate that she was willing to love Jesus more and to risk us maybe getting offended to share the truth with us. And that would change the course of our life.
Wow. I think we're going to stop for today. I have a lot I want to say on that. And I think it deserves its own episode.
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us on Grace with Conviction, and we'll see you on the next episode.